I remember the exact moment I decided to lie to my own family. I was lying in a hospital bed staring at Daniel, Melissa, and Ethan as they leaned over me waiting. Not for me to wake up, but for what I would remember. So I blinked slowly and asked, "Who are you?" The silence that followed told me everything. Melissa started crying. Daniel looked tense. But Ethan, he smiled for just a second before hiding it. That was the moment I knew someone here had been waiting for me to forget. If this story already makes you feel something, take a second to like and subscribe. And tell me in the comments, what would you do if you suddenly couldn't trust your own family? Also, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. I'd really love to hear from you. My name is Violet Carter, and until a few months ago, I believed I had built a life that was not only stable, but safe. My late husband Arthur used to say that security wasn't just about money, it was about peace. And for most of our marriage, we had both. We weren't wealthy by the standards you see on television, but we were careful, disciplined, and patient. Arthur worked as an electrical contractor for over 30 years, and I managed the books for a small medical office in town. We saved when others spent. We fixed things instead of replacing them. We made decisions together. By the time Arthur passed away, we had built something meaningful. There was the house, of course, the one I still live in, a modest but beautiful 2-story home on a quiet street just outside Columbus, Ohio. We raised our children here. Every corner of it holds a memory. Birthdays in the backyard, Christmas mornings by the fireplace, long evenings on the porch when Arthur and I would sit in silence, just listening to the wind move through the trees. And then there was the lake cabin. That was Arthur's dream. It took us nearly 10 years to save enough to buy it, and even then it was nothing more than a worn-down structure with peeling paint and a stubborn old dock. But Arthur saw potential where others saw work. Every summer he would fix a little more. New boards, fresh stain, a repaired roof. By the time we were done, it wasn't just a cabin, it was a piece of our lives. We also had retirement accounts carefully built over decades. Not extravagant, but enough to ensure I would never have to depend on anyone else. Arthur was very clear about that. "Violet," he used to say, "no matter what happens, you should always be able to stand on your own 2 feet." I thought I was honoring that. But after he passed, something in the family began to shift. At first, it was subtle, so subtle that I questioned myself more than anyone else. Daniel, my oldest son, started visiting more often. That should have felt comforting, and in the beginning it did. He would bring groceries, fix things around the house, check on me. But gradually, the conversations changed. He would linger at the kitchen table after dinner, asking questions that felt misplaced. "Mom, have you thought about simplifying things?" he asked one evening, casually stirring his coffee. Simplifying what I replied. Accounts, paperwork, all that. It might be easier if someone helped manage it. I remember smiling politely and telling him I had everything under control. And I did. I had always handled our finances. Arthur trusted me with that, and I had never given him a reason not to. Still, Daniel didn't seem satisfied with that answer. Melissa, my daughter, approached things differently. She called more often, her voice soft and warm, always checking in on how I was feeling. "Mom, I just worry about you being alone," she would say. And I appreciated that. I truly did. But over time, even her concern began to drift into something else. "Have you updated your will recently?" she asked one afternoon as if it were just another casual topic. I paused. "That's not really something I feel like discussing today," I said gently. "Oh, I didn't mean anything by it," she replied quickly. "I just think it's important to have things organized. Just in case. Just in case. It's a strange phrase, harmless on the surface, but when repeated enough times, it starts to carry weight. And then there was Ethan, my nephew. Ethan had always been the charming one. Easy smile, quick with compliments, always ready with a story. But he was also unpredictable. He would disappear for months, sometimes years, and then suddenly reappear as if no time had passed. After Arthur died, Ethan started showing up more frequently. At first, I assumed it was out of respect, perhaps even affection. But Ethan had a way of steering conversations in a direction that made me uneasy. "You've got a great setup here, Aunt Violet," he said one afternoon, glancing around the living room. "House like this? Plus that cabin. You must be sitting pretty." I laughed it off, but something about the way he said it lingered in my mind. Sitting pretty, not comfortable, not secure, sitting pretty, as if my life had become a position to be evaluated. Still, I told myself I was imagining things. After all, families talk about these things, don't they? But then the small incidents began. One morning, I opened my desk drawer and noticed that a folder containing my insurance documents had been moved. Not taken, just shifted slightly, as if someone had looked through it and tried to put it back exactly as they found it, but missed by just enough for me to notice. Another time, a piece of jewelry, a gold bracelet Arthur gave me on our 25th anniversary, was missing from its usual place. I searched for it quietly, trying not to jump to conclusions. 2 days later, it reappeared in a different drawer. I remember holding it in my hand, turning it over, slowly feeling something I didn't want to name: doubt. And then there was the bank alert. It came through as a simple notification and attempted login from an unfamiliar device. I hadn't tried to access my account that day. I rarely did from anything other than my home computer. I called the bank immediately, and they assured me that no breach had occurred. But when I asked if someone had tried to reset any information, the representative hesitated. There was an inquiry, she said carefully, but no changes were completed. An inquiry. I thanked her and hung up, but my hands didn't feel steady anymore. That was the moment something inside me shifted. Because up until then, everything could still be explained away. Misplaced items, misunderstood conversations, coincidences. But this felt deliberate. Still, I said nothing. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't accuse. I didn't even hint that I was aware of anything unusual. Instead, I watched. And then one evening, I heard something I was never meant to hear. I had gone to the kitchen for a glass of water. The house was quiet, but voices carried from the dining room, low, hurried, and tense. I recognized them immediately. Daniel and Melissa. I froze just out of sight, my hand still resting on the edge of the counter. "We can't just wait forever," Daniel was saying. "I know," Melissa replied, "but we have to be careful." There was a pause. And then Daniel said something that I will never forget. "If she starts getting confused, it'll be easier. Everything will be easier." My chest tightened. Melissa didn't object. She didn't correct him. Instead, she said quietly, "Then we just have to be ready." I stood there longer than I should have, my heart pounding in a way I hadn't felt in years. Because in that moment, something became painfully clear. They weren't just worried about me. They were waiting for me to become weak enough to take control. And for the first time since Arthur died, I didn't feel safe in my own home. After that night, something inside me changed in a way I couldn't undo. It wasn't just fear. It was awareness. The kind that makes every sound sharper, every glance more meaningful, every silence louder than words. I didn't confront Daniel. I didn't ask Melissa what she meant, and I certainly didn't let them know I had overheard anything. Instead, I did something far more important. I started paying attention. Not casually, not emotionally, carefully. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual and moved through the house, quietly retracing my steps from the previous few days. I checked my desk again this time, more thoroughly. The folder I had noticed before was still slightly out of place. But now I realized something else. Another folder, one containing property tax documents, had been flipped backward. It was a small detail, almost nothing, but not nothing. I closed the drawer slowly and stood there for a long moment thinking. Who had been in here, Daniel had a key to the house. So did Melissa. And Ethan, well, Ethan didn't need a key. He had a way of showing up when someone else was already inside. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. But I also stopped dismissing what I saw. Later that afternoon, Daniel came by unannounced. He knocked once, then let himself in like he always did. "Mom," he called out. "You home? I'm in the kitchen," I replied, keeping my voice steady. He walked in with that same concerned expression he had been wearing more often lately, his brows slightly furrowed, his tone gentle but controlled. "I was just in the area," he said. "Thought I'd check on you." That was new. Daniel didn't used to be in the area without a reason. "I'm doing just fine," I said, offering a small smile. I know," he replied quickly. "I just, after Dad, I worry." There it was again. Concern. always wrapped around something else. He moved around the kitchen, opening the fridge, glancing at the counters, taking in details that didn't seem to require his attention. "Have you been eating okay?" he asked. "Yes." "You sure?" "Because I noticed last time I said I'm fine, Daniel." My tone came out sharper than I intended. He paused just for a second and then smiled again. "Of course you are. I just want to make sure everything's taken care of." Taken care of. That phrase was starting to feel less like love and more like a plan. Before leaving, he lingered near the hallway that led to my study. "Hey, Mom," he said casually, "where do you keep your important stuff these days? You know, just in case something ever happens and we need to find things quickly." I felt it then. Not fear, clarity. "I know where everything is," I replied calmly. "That's all that matters." He held my gaze for a moment longer than necessary, then nodded. "Right, of course." But as he walked out, I noticed something different about him. He wasn't reassured. He was calculating. That evening, Melissa called. Her voice was softer than usual, almost too soft. "Mom, I've been thinking about you all day," she said. "That's kind of you," I replied. I feel like we should talk about the future a little more. Nothing serious, just making sure everything's organized." There it was again. Organized. "Melissa," I said gently, "why does it feel like every conversation lately comes back to my money?" There was a brief silence. Then she laughed lightly. "Oh, Mom, it's not about money. It's about making things easier for you, easier for me, or easier for them." "I'm not struggling," I said. "I know," she replied quickly, "but things can change. And if they do, it would be better if we were prepared." Prepared. Another word that sounded harmless until you heard it too many times. "I'll think about it," I said, ending the conversation before it could go any further. But I didn't need to think about it. Not anymore. That night, I did something I hadn't done in years. I locked my bedroom door. Not because I believed someone would try to come in, but because I needed to feel in control of something. As I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I replayed everything in my mind, the conversations, the questions, the small, almost invisible changes, and then slowly a pattern began to form. Daniel was pushing for access, Melissa was pushing for structure, and Ethan was watching. The next day, Ethan showed up. No call, no warning, just a knock at the door, and that same easy smile. "Aunt Violet," he said warmly as I opened the door, "you look great." "Thank you," I replied. Studying his face, he stepped inside without hesitation, glancing around as if reacquainting himself with the space. "I was just thinking about you," he said. "Figured I'd stop by, see if you needed anything." "That's thoughtful," I said. We sat in the living room, and for a while the conversation felt normal. He talked about work, about people I didn't know about, things that didn't matter. But then, like clockwork, it shifted. "You ever think about downsizing?" he asked suddenly. I looked at him. "No," he shrugged. "Just saying, big house like this, a lot to manage. Plus, with the market the way it is, you could get a good price and go where I asked." He smiled. "Somewhere easier. Somewhere simpler. Simpler." There was that word again. "I like my life the way it is," I said firmly. "Of course," he replied quickly. "I'm just thinking long term. Long term. For me. Or for him." As he stood to leave, he paused near my desk. "Mind if I grab a glass of water?" he asked. "Go ahead." I watched him as he walked toward the kitchen, his steps slow, his eyes drifting not just to the sink, but to the hallway, to the door of my study. And in that moment, I understood something I hadn't fully admitted to myself before. This wasn't random, this wasn't harmless curiosity. This was interest, focused, intentional, and possibly coordinated. After he left, I walked into my study and stood in the doorway looking at everything differently. The desk, the drawers, the cabinet where I kept certain documents. Nothing had been taken. Nothing was obviously wrong, but the room no longer felt private. It felt observed. And that's when the fear finally settled into something colder, something steadier, because fear can make you react, but clarity makes you plan. I sat down slowly in my chair, folded my hands in front of me, and took a deep breath. They were waiting for me to become confused, to become vulnerable, to become easy. But what they didn't realize, what none of them realized, was that I was already one step ahead. And for the first time since Arthur died, I stopped feeling like a target and started thinking like someone who was about to uncover the truth. The night I fell was not an accident, at least not entirely. I didn't trip over anything obvious. There was no loose rug, no spilled water, no broken step. One moment I was standing in the kitchen rinsing a glass, and the next I felt a sudden wave of dizziness so strong it pulled the ground out from under me. I remember reaching for the counter. I remember missing it. And then I remember the sound, my body hitting the floor sharper than I would have expected. It echoed in a way that made the house feel suddenly empty, as if even the walls were holding their breath. For a few seconds I couldn't move. Not because I was paralyzed, but because I was trying to understand what had just happened. My head throbbed, my vision blurred at the edges. But beneath all of that, there was something else, a question. Had I simply fallen, or had something led me there? I pushed that thought aside as I forced myself to sit up slowly, one hand pressed against the side of my head. The room tilted slightly, then steadied. I reached for my phone. It took me longer than usual to dial, but eventually I managed to call Daniel. He answered on the second ring. "Mom, I think I fell," I said, keeping my voice calm despite the tremor I couldn't entirely hide. "I'm on my way," he replied immediately. No hesitation, too fast. Within 20 minutes, Daniel was there. Melissa arrived shortly after, followed unsurprisingly by Ethan. They moved quickly, efficiently, almost as if they had rehearsed it. Daniel helped me to the couch, his grip firm, almost too firm. Melissa hovered, asking questions in a rapid, concerned tone. "Did you hit your head? Do you feel dizzy? Do you remember what happened?" Ethan stood slightly behind them, watching. Always watching. "I'm fine," I insisted. Just a little shaken, but they weren't interested in reassurance. Within minutes, they had decided I needed to go to the hospital. "I don't think that's necessary," I said, trying to keep control of the situation. "It is," Daniel replied, his tone leaving no room for argument. And for a brief moment, I saw something in his expression that unsettled me. Not fear, not concern, determination, as if this moment mattered more than it should. The ride to the hospital was quiet. Melissa sat beside me, holding my hand. Daniel drove. Ethan followed in his own car. No one spoke much, but I could feel it. Something had shifted. At the hospital, everything moved quickly. Nurses, questions, bright lights, the steady rhythm of medical routine. They ran tests, asked me to follow their fingers with my eyes, checked my reflexes. Eventually, a doctor came in, a calm, middle-aged man with a measured voice. "Mrs. Carter," he said gently, "you've had a mild concussion. Nothing severe, but we'll need to monitor you for a bit." "I understand," I replied. "You may experience some temporary confusion." He continued, "Difficulty recalling certain details. It's not uncommon." I nodded slowly. Temporary confusion. The words lingered in the air longer than they should have, because in that moment, something inside me clicked. Not emotionally, strategically. I glanced toward the doorway where Daniel, Melissa, and Ethan were waiting, watching, listening, waiting, and suddenly, I saw it clearly. This wasn't just a medical situation. It was an opportunity, not for them, for me, because if they believed I was confused, if they believed my memory was unreliable, then they would stop hiding. They would stop being careful. They would show me who they really were. The thought came quickly, but the decision came even faster. When the doctor finished speaking, he asked a few simple questions. "Can you tell me your full name?" I hesitated, just for a second. "Violet." I began slowly, then frowned slightly. "Violet. I'm sorry, I know it, I let my voice trail off. The reaction was immediate. Melissa's hand tightened around mine. Daniel stepped forward. "It's okay, Mom," he said quickly. "Take your time." Ethan didn't move, but I saw it. That flicker, that brief, almost invisible shift in his expression. Interest. I looked back at the doctor, letting confusion settle over my features. "I feel a little mixed up," I said softly. "That's all right," the doctor replied calmly. "It's expected. That word gave me permission." From that moment on, I committed fully. When they asked me where I lived, I hesitated. When they asked about dates, I answered vaguely. When Melissa spoke to me, I looked at her as if I was trying to place her face. Not too much, just enough. Just enough to make it believable. Just enough to make them wonder. And most importantly, just enough to make them think they had an advantage. Later, when I was alone in the hospital room, I closed my eyes and let the reality of what I had chosen settle in. This wasn't a small decision. I was about to lie to my own children. I was about to pretend weakness, confusion, vulnerability, everything Arthur had always taught me to guard against. But Arthur had also taught me something else. Sometimes he used to say the only way to see the truth is to stop people from knowing you can see it. And that's exactly what I was going to do. The next morning, they came back. All three of them. Daniel stood closest to the bed. Melissa sat beside me again. Ethan leaned casually against the wall. I opened my eyes slowly as if waking into uncertainty. Melissa smiled softly. "Hi, Mom," she said. "How are you feeling?" I looked at her, really looked, then tilted my head slightly. "I'm sorry," I said. "Do I know you?" The silence that followed was heavier than anything I had felt in years. Melissa's smile faltered. Daniel inhaled sharply. And Ethan? Ethan looked down for just a second as if hiding something very close to satisfaction. And in that moment, I knew I had made the right choice, because whatever they had been waiting for, they believed it had just begun. And now, so had I. Coming home from the hospital should have felt like relief. Instead, it felt like stepping onto a stage. Every movement I made, every word I spoke, every pause, I knew I was being watched. Not out of love, not entirely. There was something else now. Something sharper. Something that studied me, measured me, calculated. Daniel insisted on driving me home himself. "I don't think you should be alone for a while," he said as he helped me into the car, his tone firm but carefully softened. "At least until we're sure everything's stable." I nodded slowly as if I needed time to process even that simple statement. "That makes sense," I said, letting my voice drift slightly uncertain. Melissa sat in the back seat with me, her hand resting lightly on my arm. Too lightly, too deliberately. "You don't have to worry about anything, Mom," she said. "We're going to take care of you." That word again, take care. I leaned my head back against the seat and closed my eyes, not because I was tired, but because I needed them to think I was. Because I needed to listen. The ride was quiet at first. Then, just as I had hoped, they began to speak as if I wasn't fully present. "She's worse than I thought," Daniel said quietly. "It's just temporary," Melissa replied, though there was uncertainty in her voice. "The doctor said that." "But what if it's not?" Daniel pressed. "What if this is the beginning of something else?" A pause. Then Melissa lowered her voice even more. "Then we need to move faster." My fingers curled slightly in my lap, but I kept my breathing steady. Move faster. They weren't even trying to hide it anymore. By the time we reached the house, I had already learned more than I had in weeks. Daniel helped me out of the car again, his hand firm on my elbow. "Careful," he said, guiding me toward the front door. Inside, everything looked exactly the same, and yet completely different. The furniture hadn't moved. The walls hadn't changed. But the feeling, the sense of safety that had once filled every corner of this house, was gone. Because now, I knew. I wasn't just living here. I was being observed here. Daniel walked me to the couch. "Why don't you sit down?" he said. "I'll get you some water." "I can do it," I replied, letting a slight hesitation slip into my words. "It's okay," he insisted quickly. "Let me." He moved toward the kitchen. Melissa stayed beside me. Too close. "You must be so confused right now," she said, gently studying my face. I looked at her, letting my expression soften into uncertainty. "A little," I admitted. "Things feel fuzzy." She nodded as if that confirmed something for her. "That's all right," she said. "We'll help you through it. Help. Always help. But never without purpose." A few minutes later, Daniel returned with a glass of water. As he handed it to me, I let my fingers tremble slightly, not enough to be obvious, but enough to reinforce the image they were already building. "You see," Melissa said softly. She shouldn't be alone. Daniel didn't respond right away, but I saw the way his eyes moved not to me, but past me, toward the hallway, toward my study. That was the first time I realized something important. They weren't just reacting to my condition. They were adjusting their behavior around it, which meant they were already thinking ahead. Later that afternoon, Ryan arrived. Daniel's wife. She hadn't been at the hospital, which didn't surprise me. Ryan had always been selective about when she showed concern. But now, as she stepped into the house, her expression was carefully arranged into something that looked like sympathy. "Oh, Violet," she said softly, walking toward me. I heard what happened. I looked at her, tilting my head slightly. "I'm sorry. Have we met?" She paused for just a fraction of a second, then smiled. "Of course," she said gently. "I'm Ryan, Daniel's wife." I nodded slowly as if trying to place her. "Right," I said. I think I remember. But I didn't. And that was exactly what she wanted to hear. Ryan's eyes flickered briefly toward Daniel. A silent exchange, quick, subtle, but unmistakable. They were communicating without words now, and I was no longer part of the conversation. As the day went on, the pattern became clearer. Daniel stayed close, always positioning himself as the one in control. Melissa hovered, offering emotional support, but constantly asking small, probing questions. Ryan observed, stepping in only when necessary, reinforcing Daniel's authority. And Ethan arrived just before dinner. Of course he did. "Aunt Violet," he said warmly as he stepped inside, his voice carrying that same easy charm. "I heard you had a little accident." I looked at him, squinting slightly as if trying to focus. "I'm sorry," I said. "You look familiar, but I can't—" "That's okay," he interrupted, quickly smiling. "It's Ethan." I nodded. "Ethan," I repeated softly. "Right." But what mattered wasn't what I said. It was what I saw. Because for just a moment, Ethan's eyes moved past me. Not to Daniel, not to Melissa, but to the hallway, to my study. The same place Daniel had looked earlier, the same place Ryan had glanced at without turning her head. It wasn't coincidence, it was focus. And that told me everything I needed to know. Dinner was tense, not outwardly. On the surface, everything appeared normal. Plates were set, food was served, voices were calm, but underneath it all there was something else, something unspoken. Every question felt like a test. Every answer I gave was measured. I pretended to forget small things, what day it was, what I had eaten earlier, where I had placed my glasses, and each time I did, I watched. Daniel became more confident. Melissa became more reassuring. Ryan became more observant. And Ethan became more interested. After dinner, as the dishes were being cleared, I remained at the table, letting my gaze drift as if I were lost in thought. That's when I heard it. Not clearly, not directly, but enough. "She won't even notice," a voice whispered from the kitchen. I didn't need to see who said it. I already knew, because the tone wasn't concerned. It wasn't worried. It wasn't even cautious. It was certain. Certain that I was no longer aware. Certain that I was no longer in control. Certain that I was easy. I lowered my eyes, letting my expression remain distant. But inside, something hardened. Because in that moment, I understood something I hadn't fully accepted before. This wasn't just about opportunity. It wasn't just about temptation. This was intention. And whatever they were planning, it had already begun. I sat there for a long time after everyone else moved into the living room. Quiet, still. Listening to the faint murmur of their voices in the distance, and for the first time since I started this, I felt something unexpected. Not fear, not sadness, but clarity. Because now I knew. They weren't just waiting anymore. They were preparing, and that meant so was I. That night, after everyone finally left, I sat alone in the living room with the lights off. Not because I was tired, but because I needed to think clearly. The house was quiet again, but it didn't feel like the same quiet I used to love. This silence wasn't peaceful, it was watchful, like something had been set into motion, and now all I could do was decide whether I would stay ahead of it or fall behind. I folded my hands in my lap and stared into the darkness. They had already started. Daniel was positioning himself as the decision maker. Melissa was laying emotional groundwork. Ryan was reinforcing structure. And Ethan was waiting for the right moment to act. But now I had something they didn't expect: time. Because as long as they believed I was confused, they would underestimate me. And that was the only advantage I needed. The next morning I began. Carefully, quietly, without drawing attention. The first call I made was to Howard Green. Arthur had trusted him for years, long before we ever thought about wills or estate plans. Howard wasn't just a lawyer. He was someone who understood the difference between protecting assets and protecting people, Violet, he said when he answered, his voice steady but surprised. Everything all right? Yes, I replied softly, but I need to see you, privately. There was a brief pause. Then he said, when today, I answered, if possible, I'll make time. I didn't explain anything over the phone. I couldn't risk it. Instead, I waited until mid-morning when I knew the house would be empty. Daniel had gone to work, Melissa had errands, and Ryan didn't stay unless there was something to gain. I moved slowly, deliberately maintaining my role even when no one was watching. Because habits matter. If I slipped now, even once, it could unravel everything. When I stepped outside, the air felt different. Sharper, clearer. For the first time since the hospital, I allowed my posture to straighten fully. My steps became steady, my mind focused. By the time I reached Howard's office, I wasn't confused. I wasn't fragile. I was fully present. He saw it immediately. The moment I walked in, his expression changed not to alarm, but to understanding. Sit down, he said, quietly, closing the door behind me. And I told him everything. Not emotionally, not dramatically, just clearly. The conversations I overheard, the missing items, the bank alert, the shift in behavior, and most importantly, my decision to pretend. Howard listened without interrupting, his hands folded in front of him. When I finished, he leaned back slightly, exhaling. You're certain? He asked. Yes. And they believe you're cognitively impaired. Yes. Another pause. Then he nodded slowly. Then you're in a very rare position, Violet, he said. You have insight, while they think you don't. I met his gaze. That's exactly why I came to you. He considered that for a moment, then leaned forward again. If we're going to do this, he said carefully, we do it properly, legally, quietly, and thoroughly. That's what I want, I replied. And just like that, the plan began. By the time I left Howard's office, we had already taken the first steps. He would begin securing my legal documents, reviewing my will, ensuring no unauthorized changes could be made, and preparing safeguards in case anyone attempted to claim I was incompetent. But that wasn't enough, because I didn't just want protection. I wanted proof. The second person I went to was Eleanor Price. Eleanor lived 2 houses down from me. Most people saw her as a kind retired woman who spent her mornings gardening and her afternoons reading on the porch. But what most people didn't know was that Eleanor had spent over 30 years working in banking, and she understood financial behavior better than anyone I knew. When I knocked on her door, she answered with a warm smile. Violet, she said, I was just thinking about you. I need your help, I replied quietly. Her expression changed immediately. Come in. Inside, I told her the same story. And just like Howard, she didn't react with shock. She reacted with focus. All right, she said when I finished. If someone's testing access to your accounts, we can track that, how I asked. She smiled slightly. Because people who think they're being clever usually aren't as careful as they believe. Within an hour, Eleanor had already begun coordinating with someone she trusted at the bank, someone who could monitor unusual activity more closely, flag suspicious inquiries, and alert us immediately if anything changed. And just like that, I had eyes where I needed them most. But there was one more step, the most important one. When I returned home, I moved through the house slowly, carefully, intentionally. Because now everything I did had a purpose. I opened my desk drawer and removed the most important documents, original deeds, account statements, insurance records. Not all at once, not obviously, just enough to ensure that what remained looked real. Then I replaced them with copies. Close enough to pass a quick glance, different enough to expose anyone who tried to use them. Next, I created something else, a trail. A simple envelope placed just slightly out of alignment in the drawer. Inside it, a handwritten note mentioning a secondary account, partial account numbers. A reference to a safe code, none of it real, all of it believable. Then, with Eleanor's help, I installed something small but powerful, cameras. Legal discreet, positioned only in areas I own my study, the hallway leading to it. Nothing invasive, nothing illegal, just enough. Just enough to see. When everything was in place, I stepped back and looked around the room. It looked exactly the same, but now it wasn't just a room. It was a test. That evening, when Daniel came by again, I was ready. I sat on the couch, a book open in my lap, my expression soft and distant. "How are you feeling today?" he asked. "A little better," I said slowly. "Still, forgetting things." He nodded, watching me closely. "That's okay," he said. "It'll take time." Time. Yes, that's exactly what I needed. As he walked past me, I saw it again. That glance, toward the hallway, toward the study. And this time, I didn't feel uneasy. I felt certain, because now everything was in place. The stage was set, and all that was left was to see who would step into it first. If there is one thing no one prepares you for, it's how painful it is to pretend you are no longer yourself. The plan was working. That much was clear. But what I hadn't fully anticipated was the cost. Not financial, not legal, emotional. Because every day that I played the role of the confused, fragile version of myself, I had to sit quietly and watch the people I raised begin to treat me like I was already gone. And that kind of heartbreak doesn't come all at once. It builds, slowly, in moments. Small ones at first, like the way Daniel started finishing my sentences even when I wasn't struggling. "Mom, you mean the living room," he would say, gently correcting me when I deliberately used the wrong word. Or the way Melissa began explaining things to me in a tone she used when Lily was a child. "No, Mom, that's not how that works." She would say softly, her voice patient, but condescending. At first I told myself it was part of the act, that I needed to accept it, endure it. But then it changed. It deepened. And that's when it stopped feeling like an act and started feeling like erasure. One afternoon, Daniel came over with Ryan. I was sitting in the living room, flipping through a magazine without really reading it when they walked in. "Hey, Mom," Daniel said, his voice already carrying that careful tone he had started using around me. "Hello?" I replied, looking up slowly as if I needed a moment to recognize him. Ryan gave me a polite smile. "How are you feeling today, Violet?" she asked. "Better," I said, "I think." Daniel nodded, then glanced at Ryan. That silent communication again, always quick, always subtle, but never invisible to me. We were thinking Ryan began stepping forward slightly that it might be a good idea to start looking at other living arrangements. I looked at her, letting confusion fill my expression. Other arrangements. Daniel stepped in quickly. "Just temporarily," he said. "Until you're fully recovered. Somewhere with a little more support." Support. That word again. "What's wrong with here?" I asked, my voice soft. "Nothing," he said quickly. "It's just, this house is a lot to manage, and we want to make sure you're safe." Safe. I nodded slowly as if considering it. "I like it here," I said quietly. Ryan's smile tightened slightly. "We know," she said, "but sometimes what we like isn't what's best for us." That was the first time I felt it clearly. Not concern, not care, authority, as if the decision was no longer mine. I lowered my gaze, letting my shoulders relax, as if I were too uncertain to argue. "Maybe we can talk about it later," I said. Daniel nodded. "Of course," he replied. No pressure, but there was pressure. I could feel it in the room. In the way they stood. In the way they looked at each other. In the way they spoke about my life. As if I wasn't fully part of it anymore. Later that evening, Melissa arrived. Alone. She sat beside me on the couch, closer than usual. "Mom," she said softly, "I think we need to have an honest conversation." I turned to her, letting my expression remain open, uncertain. "Okay," I said. She took a breath. "I know this is hard," she began. "And I know you're scared, but things are changing, and we need to start thinking about what's best for you, what's best for me." I repeated slowly. "Yes," she said. "And sometimes that means letting us help more." There it was again. Help. But now it sounded different. Heavier. "I don't want to be a burden," I said quietly. And the moment the words left my mouth, I saw it. That flicker in her eyes. Not sadness, not reassurance. Relief. As if I had just said exactly what she needed me to say. "You're not a burden," she replied quickly. "We just want to make things easier. Easier, always easier, but never for me." That night, after she left, I sat alone again. But this time the silence felt different. Heavier. Because now the lines had been crossed. They weren't just observing me anymore. They were starting to reshape my life, and they were doing it under the assumption that I couldn't stop them. The next day, Ethan returned. Of course he did. He knocked lightly, then stepped inside before I could fully respond. "Aunt Violet," he said, smiling. "Thought I'd check in." I looked up at him, blinking slowly. "Ethan," I said. "Right." He laughed softly. "Still getting there, huh?" I nodded. "A little." He walked around the room casually, his hands in his pockets, his eyes moving not randomly but deliberately. Always aware. Always scanning. "You holding up okay?" he asked. "I think so," I replied. He nodded, then leaned slightly against the doorway. "You know, he said casually, if you ever need help with anything. Errands, bills, paperwork. I've got some free time these days." There it was. Direct, but still wrapped in kindness. "Thank you," I said. "That's very nice." He smiled. "Family, right, family." I almost laughed. Instead, I let my gaze drift slightly as if I had lost the thread of the conversation. And that's when it happened. He thought I wasn't paying attention. Just for a moment. Just one moment, he stepped away from me, toward the hallway, toward my study. He didn't go inside, not yet, but he looked, carefully, measuring distance, opportunity, risk, and when he turned back, his expression was exactly the same as before. Easy, relaxed, charming, as if nothing had happened, but everything had, because now I knew. He wasn't just curious, he was preparing. That evening, I stayed in the living room longer than usual, quiet, still, listening, and once again I heard it. Voices in the kitchen, low, careful, but not careful enough. "She won't even notice," Ethan said. A pause. Then Daniel's voice. "Just don't do anything stupid." "I won't," Ethan replied. "I know what I'm doing." I felt my heart beat once. Slow, heavy, but my face didn't change. My posture didn't shift, because this was the moment I had been waiting for. Not the act itself, but the certainty, because now there was no doubt. They weren't just thinking about it anymore. They were planning it. And soon one of them would make a move, and when they did, I would be ready. The first move came sooner than I expected. It was late, well past midnight when I heard it. A sound so faint that under normal circumstances I might have ignored it. A soft shift of weight, the nearly silent creak of a floorboard in the hallway. But I had been waiting for it. For days I had trained myself to sleep lightly. Not restless, not anxious, but alert. The kind of awareness that sits just beneath the surface, ready to rise at the smallest disturbance. And now, it had. I opened my eyes slowly, keeping my breathing steady, even. The room was dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of the street lamp outside my window. Another sound, closer this time. Not random, intentional. Someone was inside my house. I didn't move, not yet, because this was the moment everything had been building toward. Instead, I let my body remain still. My expression relaxed, as if I were still deep in sleep. And then quietly, carefully I shifted just enough to glance toward the hallway. The door to my bedroom was slightly open, just as I had left it. But beyond it, a shadow moved, slow, controlled, heading exactly where I knew it would go, toward my study. My heart didn't race. It didn't need to, because fear wasn't what I felt. What I felt was confirmation. I waited. Counted the seconds in my head. 1, 2, 3. Then gently I reached toward the nightstand and picked up my phone. Not to call anyone, just to check the time. 12:47 a.m. I placed it back down carefully, then closed my eyes again. Because now it wasn't about watching. It was about letting it happen. Across the house, I heard the faintest click. A drawer, then another. Soft movements. Controlled. Methodical. Whoever it was, they weren't rushing. They weren't panicking, they were searching. And that told me something important. This wasn't impulsive. This was planned. Minutes passed. Maybe 10. Maybe 15. Time felt different when you were lying still listening to someone move through your private space as if it belonged to them. And then silence. Complete. Heavy. I waited a little longer. Then slowly I sat up, careful not to make a sound. I slipped my feet onto the floor and stood my body steady, my mind sharper than it had been in days. Step by step, I moved toward the door. The hallway was empty, but the air felt different, disturbed. I walked toward my study. The door was slightly ajar, just enough. I pushed it open slowly. Inside, everything looked normal. At first glance, the desk, the chair, the drawers, all in place, but I knew better. I stepped inside and moved directly to the desk, opened the drawer, and there it was. The envelope. Gone. A small detail, but the most important one. I exhaled slowly, closing the drawer again. Then I turned, scanning the room carefully. Nothing else appeared disturbed. No obvious signs of intrusion. No mess, no panic. Whoever had been here knew exactly what they were doing. I stood there for a long moment, letting the reality settle in. It had happened. The first step. The line had been crossed, and now there was no going back. The next morning, I returned to my role, carefully, deliberately. Daniel arrived first. "Morning, Mom," he said, stepping into the kitchen. "Morning," I replied, letting my voice carry that same soft uncertainty. "How'd you sleep?" he asked. "Fine, I think I said. I don't really remember." He nodded, watching me closely. Always watching. A few minutes later, Melissa arrived, then Ryan, and finally Ethan, right on time. I greeted each of them the same way. Warm, confused, uncertain, but inside I was observing everything, every glance, every pause, every word. And Ethan was different. Not dramatically, not obviously, but subtly. His posture was slightly more relaxed. His movements just a little more confident. And his eyes didn't search the room the way they had before, because now he didn't need to. He had already found what he came for. "Good to see you, Aunt Violet," he said, smiling as he stepped inside. "You too," I replied softly. We sat in the living room, talked about nothing, surface-level conversation, carefully maintained normalcy, but underneath it all, something had shifted, because now one of them knew something the others didn't, and I needed to see how that would play out. Later that afternoon, I made my way into the kitchen, moving slowly, deliberately, as if I were unsure of my steps. Eleanor had told me to wait, to observe, to let the next move reveal itself, and she was right, because by early evening, it did. My phone rang, a number I didn't recognize. I answered, letting my voice remain soft. "Hello, Mrs. Carter," a woman's voice said. "This is First National Bank. We're calling to verify a recent inquiry regarding your account." I felt it immediately. That quiet confirmation. "Yes," I replied. "We received a request for information earlier today," she continued. "We just need to confirm whether it was authorized." I let a pause stretch, then said, I'm not sure." "All right," she said carefully. "We'll flag the account for now. If you have any concerns, please contact us directly." "I will," I replied. When I hung up, my hand remained still for a moment longer than necessary, because now, it wasn't just suspicion. It was action. Someone had taken the information from that envelope, and they had tried to use it. But here's what mattered most. The envelope wasn't real. The account didn't exist, which meant whoever had taken it had just exposed themselves. That evening, as we sat around the dinner table once again, I looked at each of them carefully. Daniel, Melissa, Ryan, Ethan. One of them had already made their move, and the others either didn't know yet or were pretending not to. I lowered my gaze, letting my expression soften into quiet confusion, but inside everything was clear, because now the game had changed. This wasn't about waiting anymore. This was about uncovering, because the first move had been made, and soon the truth would follow. Once the first move is made, everything becomes clearer, not immediately, not all at once, but piece by piece, the truth begins to surface in ways that can no longer be ignored. That night after the bank called, I didn't sleep much. Not because I was afraid, but because my mind was working, connecting details, revisiting moments, re-examining every word, every glance, every silence. Ethan had taken the envelope. That part was no longer a question, but something didn't sit right. Not about what he did, but about how he did it. Because Ethan wasn't careful. He was bold, yes, but not precise. Not patient, not the kind of person who would construct a plan that involved timing, coordination, and restraint. And yet, everything about this situation felt structured, layered, intentional, which meant one thing. Ethan wasn't the one leading this. He was following. The next morning, I moved through my routine as usual, slow, slightly uncertain, letting my confusion show just enough to maintain the illusion. Daniel arrived early. Too early. "Morning, Mom," he said already inside before I had fully stepped into the kitchen. "Morning," I replied. "You okay?" he asked. "I think so." I said, "I feel a little off today." He nodded, watching me carefully. "Probably just part of the recovery," he said. It takes time. Time, yes, but not as much as he thought. A few minutes later, Melissa called. I'm thinking of stopping by, she said. I just want to check on you. Okay, I replied. Her voice sounded calm, too calm, as if she was waiting for something or expecting something. By noon, everyone was there again. Daniel, Melissa, Ryan, and Ethan, always Ethan. We sat in the living room, the air thick with something unspoken. And then it happened. Not a confession, not a mistake, something smaller but far more revealing. So Melissa said casually, "Have you noticed anything unusual lately?" The question was light, carefully phrased, but it wasn't innocent. I looked at her, tilting my head slightly. Unusual, like things being out of place, she clarified, or missing. There it was. Not concern, confirmation. She was checking whether I had noticed, checking whether Ethan had been successful. I let my gaze drift slightly as if searching my memory. I don't think so, I said slowly. Everything seems normal. Melissa nodded, but I saw it. That small shift in her shoulders. Relief. Not because I was safe, but because I was unaware. And in that moment, everything clicked. It wasn't Ethan. Not really. He was just the one willing to act. But Melissa was the one directing it. I felt it settle into place inside me. Cold, clear, unavoidable. Because suddenly everything made sense. The conversations, the timing, the pressure, the emotional framing. She wasn't reacting to the situation. She was shaping it. Later that afternoon, I found confirmation. Not by accident, but by paying attention. Melissa stepped outside to take a phone call. She thought she was out of range. She wasn't. I stayed just inside the doorway, still enough to remain unnoticed. "I told you to be careful," she whispered. A pause. Then no. She didn't notice. She doesn't even remember where things are half the time. Another pause. Then her voice lowered even more. "We can't rush it. If we push too hard, it'll look suspicious." My breath stayed steady. My body didn't move, but inside everything hardened. Because this wasn't assumption anymore. This was truth. She wasn't just involved. She was controlling it, guiding it, managing the pace. Ethan was just the hands. Daniel was the leverage. And Melissa was the mind. That evening, I sat alone in my study. Not pretending, not acting, just thinking. Because now the situation had changed. This wasn't just about catching someone stealing. This was about uncovering a system, a plan that had been building long before my fall, a plan that relied on something far more dangerous than opportunity. It relied on perception, on making it look like care, on making it sound like concern, on turning control into protection. And that kind of manipulation is harder to expose because it hides behind love, but not perfectly, never perfectly, because people always leave traces. And now I knew where to look. The next piece came sooner than I expected. 2 days later, Eleanor called. "I've got something," she said, "and what is it?" I asked. "There's been a second inquiry," she explained. "Different approach this time, more careful." I leaned back slightly in my chair. "Same person." "Not exactly," she said. "This one knew more. Asked the right questions, used the right language." My chest tightened slightly. "Melissa?" "It had to be." She didn't give her name. Eleanor continued. "But I've been in this field long enough to recognize behavior." And I asked. She wasn't guessing, Eleanor said. She was confirming, which meant she already knew what she was looking for, or thought she did. "Can you trace it?" I asked. "Not directly," Eleanor replied, "but we can monitor it closely." "That's enough," I said. Because now I didn't need proof of action. I had proof of intent, and that was more dangerous. That evening, as we sat at dinner once again, I looked at Melissa differently. Not as my daughter, not as someone I needed to protect, but as someone who had made a choice, a deliberate one. She smiled at me, soft, warm, convincing. "How are you feeling today, Mom?" she asked. I looked at her, held her gaze, just a second longer than usual, then softened my expression. "I think I'm getting better," I said slowly. Her smile tightened, just slightly. "Really?" she asked. "Yes," I replied. "Some things are starting to feel clearer." A pause, a very small one, but enough. Because in that moment, I saw it. Not relief, not happiness, concern. Because clarity was not part of her plan. And that's when I knew. The game wasn't just about catching them anymore. It was about timing. Because if I revealed too soon, they would retreat, regroup, hide. But if I waited, if I let them believe they were still ahead, they would go further, make bigger mistakes, expose more, and that's exactly what I needed. So I lowered my gaze again, let my shoulders relax, let the confusion return. I just need more rest, I added softly. Melissa nodded. Of course you do, she said. But her eyes stayed on me just a little longer than before, because now she wasn't just watching me, she was watching for change. And that meant she was starting to feel it, the shift, the imbalance, the possibility that she wasn't as in control as she thought. And soon, very soon, she would find out just how wrong she was. If everything else in my life had begun to feel uncertain, fragile, and carefully staged, Lily was the one thing that still felt real. And in a situation like mine, that mattered more than anything. Because when you start questioning the intentions of your own children, you begin to doubt everything. Every word, every gesture, every memory. But Lily never made me feel that way. She didn't arrive with questions. She didn't circle conversations toward money. She didn't watch me like she was waiting for something to slip. She just showed up. The first time she came by after my accident, she didn't even knock loudly. Just a soft tap at the door like she didn't want to disturb me. When I opened it, she stood there with a small paper bag in her hands. "Hi, Grandma," she said gently. Her voice didn't carry urgency or performance, just warmth. "Hi," I replied, letting my expression remain slightly uncertain. "I'm sorry, remind me, Lily," she said quickly, smiling. "Your granddaughter." I nodded slowly. "Lily," I repeated. "That's right." She didn't flinch, didn't look hurt, didn't look relieved either. She just accepted it. "I brought you something," she said, holding up the bag. "It's that tea you like, the chamomile one." That caught me off guard, because that wasn't something you bring to impress someone. That's something you bring when you know someone. "Thank you," I said softly. She stepped inside, moving naturally through the house, not searching, not scanning, not observing, just present. We sat together in the living room. No tension, no hidden agenda, just quiet. And for the first time in days, I didn't feel like I was being tested. "How are you feeling?" she asked after a moment. I tilted my head slightly, a little confused, I said. "Things don't always make sense." She nodded. "That's okay," she said. "You don't have to rush. No pressure, no urgency, just patience." That alone told me everything I needed to know. Over the next few days, Lily came back again and again. Always the same way, quiet, gentle, uncomplicated. She would sit with me sometimes, reading out loud, sometimes just talking about small things, school friends, a book she was reading, nothing about money, nothing about the house, nothing about what happens next. And slowly, I began to understand something important. Lily wasn't trying to figure out what I had. She was trying to make sure I was okay. That difference is everything. But I still had to be careful, because even trust, real trust, had to be tested. Not because I doubted her, but because the situation demanded certainty. One afternoon, I decided to try something small, subtle. We were sitting at the kitchen table, a book open between us. "I feel like I'm forgetting something important," I said softly. She looked up at me. "What do you mean, something about papers?" I continued slowly. "Important ones." Her expression shifted slightly, not toward interest, but toward concern. "Like what?" she asked. "I don't know," I said. "I just feel like I should remember." She watched me for a moment, then closed the book gently. "Do you want me to help you look?" she asked. Simple, direct. No hesitation, no hidden meaning, just help. I nodded slowly. We walked to my study together. I let her see the drawer, the folders, everything that had been part of the setup. She didn't rush, didn't reach immediately, didn't search with urgency. Instead, she looked at me. "Do you remember what you're looking for?" she asked. "No," I said softly. She nodded. "Then maybe we shouldn't touch anything yet," she said. "If it's important, it's probably better to wait until you feel clearer." I felt something shift in my chest. Not suspicion, not tension, relief. Because that response, that instinct couldn't be faked. She wasn't thinking about access. She was thinking about protection. And in that moment, I knew. Lily wasn't part of this. Not even close. As the days passed, I started noticing something else. Lily was watching them. Not openly, not confrontationally, but carefully, the way I was. One evening, Daniel raised his voice slightly when I couldn't remember where I had placed my glasses. "They were right there, Mom," he said, frustration slipping through. "I'm sorry," I murmured. Before I could say anything else, Lily spoke. "It's okay," she said calmly. "She's still recovering." Daniel looked at her surprised. "I know that," he replied. "Then maybe don't sound like she did something wrong," Lily said quietly. The room went still. Daniel didn't argue, but he didn't like it either. I saw it in his face, that flicker of irritation, of being challenged. And Lily didn't back down. She just sat there, calm, certain, present. Later that night, after everyone else had gone, she stayed behind for a few minutes. "I don't like how they talk to you," she said softly. I looked at her. "They're just worried," I replied, staying in character. She shook her head slightly. "No," she said, "that's not what it looks like." That caught me off guard, because she wasn't reacting emotionally. She was observing, just like I was. "What does it look like?" I asked. She hesitated, then said quietly, "Like they're already deciding things for you." The words settled into the room like something heavy, because they were true, completely true, and she saw it. Without needing proof, without needing confirmation, just by paying attention. I smiled faintly. "You're very perceptive," I said. She shrugged. "I just notice things." Yes, she did. And that made her different, because while the others were focused on what they could take, Lily was focused on what was happening. That night, after she left, I sat alone in the living room again, but this time, the silence felt different. Not empty, not heavy, just quiet. Because for the first time since all of this began, I knew I wasn't completely alone, and that mattered more than anything. Because in a situation built on deception, truth becomes your strongest ally. And Lily, without even knowing it, had become mine. By the time they staged the intervention, I already knew it was coming. You can feel that kind of thing before it happens. It's in the way conversations shift, the way people stop asking and start deciding, the way concern becomes urgency. And that morning, the air in the house felt different, heavier, organized, planned. Daniel arrived first earlier than usual. Not with groceries, not with tools, just himself dressed more formally than I'd seen him in weeks. "Morning, Mom," he said, his tone unusually controlled. "Morning," I replied softly, letting my voice drift slightly. "Melissa's coming over," he added. "We just want to talk about a few things." Talk, that word again. It always meant more than it said. I nodded slowly, as if unsure. Okay, within 30 minutes, the house was full. Melissa, Ryan, Ethan, all of them, together at the same time. That alone told me everything I needed to know. Because this wasn't casual. This was coordinated. "Why don't we sit in the living room?" Melissa suggested gently. I allowed Daniel to guide me to the couch, my steps slow, slightly unsteady. They arranged themselves around me. Daniel standing, Melissa beside me, Ryan slightly behind, Ethan near the doorway. Positions, not random, strategic. I folded my hands in my lap, lowering my gaze just enough to appear uncertain. "What's going on?" I asked quietly. Melissa reached for my hand. "Mom," she began softly, "we're all here because we care about you. Care, always care, but never without purpose. You've been struggling," she continued, "and we think it's time we talk about making things safer for you. Safer." There it was, the setup. "I'm okay," I said gently. "I know you feel that way," Daniel said quickly, "but sometimes it's hard to see things clearly from the inside. From the inside, as if I were no longer capable of perspective." I nodded slowly as if considering his words. "Maybe," I said. Melissa squeezed my hand. "We just want to help," she said. "And that means putting a few things in place." She glanced at Ryan. That was the signal. Ryan stepped forward, placing a folder on the coffee table. My chest didn't tighten. My breathing didn't change, because I had already prepared for this. "What is that?" I asked, letting a slight tremor enter my voice. "Just some paperwork," Ryan said smoothly. "Nothing complicated, nothing complicated. That was the most dangerous kind." Daniel moved closer. "It's just temporary," he added, "until you're feeling better." Temporary. Another word designed to soften control. I looked down at the folder, didn't reach for it, didn't open it, just looked, as if I didn't fully understand what I was seeing. Melissa leaned in slightly. "It's a power of attorney," she said gently, "so we can help manage things for you." There it was, Finally said out loud, not hinted, not implied, declared. I let a pause stretch, just long enough, then asked softly, "Manage what Daniel stepped in again. Your accounts, your bills, the house, just everything that might be too much right now. Everything. Not some things, not specific things. Everything." I swallowed slowly. Let my shoulders drop. Let uncertainty settle into my expression. "I don't know," I said. Melissa's grip tightened slightly. "It's just for now," she insisted. "You won't even have to think about anything exactly. That was the point. You trust us, don't you?" Daniel added. There it was, the pressure, emotional, direct, carefully placed. I looked at him, really looked, then let my gaze drift as if I were struggling to hold on to the thought. I think so," I said. That was enough. I saw it immediately. The shift, relief. Not because I trusted them, but because they believed I did. Ryan opened the folder, turned it toward me, pointed to the signature line. "Just sign here," she said gently. Just sign. As if it were nothing, as if it were routine, as if it weren't the moment everything changed. I reached for the pen slowly, let my hand tremble slightly, let hesitation show, because this moment needed to last, needed to stretch, needed to give them time to reveal more. "What happens if I don't?" I asked softly. The room went still. Not completely, but enough. Because that question wasn't part of their script. Melissa spoke first. "Mom, why would you say that? I don't understand," I replied. Daniel's tone shifted slightly, still controlled, but firmer. "This is for your protection." "Protection, always protection, and if I don't," I repeated. A longer pause this time. Then Ryan answered, "Well, it would make things more difficult. More difficult." There it was, not concern, not care, consequence. I nodded slowly as if processing. Difficult how Daniel exhaled. "We might have to look at other options," he said, "other options." And suddenly, it wasn't subtle anymore, because now the threat was there, hidden but present. I lowered my gaze again, let silence fill the room, let tension build, because the more they spoke, the more they revealed, and I needed that, needed them to go further, to say more, to show everything. I held the pen loosely in my hand, then slowly set it back down. "I'm tired," I said softly. Melissa blinked. I feel tired," I repeated. "Can we do this later?" The shift was immediate, not anger, not yet, but frustration, disappointment, because they had come prepared, ready, expecting this moment to go differently. Daniel stepped back slightly. "That's fine," he said, though his voice carried tension. "We'll talk about it again soon," Melissa added quickly. Soon, yes, very soon. Because they weren't done, not even close. And neither was I. As they gathered the papers, I leaned back into the couch, letting my eyes close as if exhaustion had taken over. But inside, everything was sharp, clear, focused, because now I had what I needed. Not just suspicion, not just evidence, but intent, undeniable, documented, real. They hadn't just thought about taking control, they had tried, and that meant the next step was mine. The day I chose to end the performance, I woke up earlier than usual. Not because I had to, but because I was ready. There's a certain clarity that comes when you've waited long enough, when you've seen enough, heard enough, endured enough. The fear fades, the hesitation disappears, and all that remains is certainty. I sat at the edge of my bed for a few minutes, letting that feeling settle in. This was the day everything would change. Not gradually, not subtly, completely. By mid-morning, I had already made the calls. Howard confirmed he would arrive on time. Eleanor said she would be there as well. Everything had been prepared. All I had to do now was bring them together. I walked into the kitchen where Daniel was already sitting, scrolling through his phone. "Good morning," I said. My voice was different, still soft, but steadier. He looked up immediately. "Morning, Mom," he replied, studying me for a moment longer than usual. "You seem better." "I think I am," I said slowly. "Actually, I was thinking—" He leaned forward slightly. "Yes, I'd like everyone to come over today," I continued. "All of you." There it was, the invitation. He hesitated for just a fraction of a second, then nodded. "Of course," he said. "That sounds like a good idea." Good, yes, it was. Within a few hours, they were all there. Melissa, Ryan, Ethan, and Lily. I had asked her to come too, not because she was part of this, but because she deserved to see the truth. We gathered in the living room, the same room where they had tried to take control just days before, the same couch, the same table, the same positions. But this time, the power was different. I sat in my usual place, hands folded calmly in my lap. Howard stood near the window, quiet but present. Eleanor sat beside him, her posture composed. The moment Daniel saw them, his expression shifted. "Mom, what's this?" he asked. "Just a conversation," I replied. Melissa's eyes narrowed slightly. "Why is your lawyer here?" she asked carefully. I looked at her, really looked, and for the first time since this began, I didn't soften my expression, because I wanted everything to be clear, I said. The room went still. Not dramatically, but enough. Enough for them to feel it. I took a slow breath, then began. "I've been thinking a lot over the past few days," I said. "About what's been happening, about what I've been feeling." Daniel stepped forward slightly. "Mom, if this is about the paperwork, it's not." I interrupted. My voice wasn't loud, but it was firm, and that alone was enough to stop him. Melissa leaned forward. "What do you mean?" I turned my gaze toward her. "Do you remember," I said slowly, "the night you stood in the dining room with Daniel and said, 'If she gets confused, everything gets easier'?" The silence that followed was immediate, heavy, unavoidable. Melissa froze. Daniel's face changed. Not dramatically, but enough to confirm everything. "I remember that," I continued calmly, "just like I remember the conversation on the phone 2 days ago, the one where you said I didn't notice anything." Melissa's lips parted slightly. No words came out, because now there was no confusion, no misunderstanding, just truth. "I remember the night someone went into my study," I said, my voice steady, "opened my drawers, took an envelope that didn't belong to them." Ethan shifted, just slightly, but enough. "I remember the call from the bank," I added, "about the inquiry that was made using information that wasn't real." Now everyone was still. No one moved. No one spoke, because the room had changed, completely. I leaned forward slightly, and then for the first time I said it. Clearly, without hesitation. I never lost my memory. The words settled into the room like something solid, unbreakable. Daniel stepped back. Melissa's expression cracked. Ryan looked at Ethan, and Ethan looked at the floor. I heard everything. I continued, from the very beginning. Howard stepped forward, then placing a folder on the table. Inside it, everything. Documentation, records, evidence, and most importantly, the footage. Eleanor reached for the remote and turned on the small screen we had set up. No dramatic build-up, no warning, just truth. The video played, Ethan in the hallway, moving quietly, entering the study, opening the drawer, taking the envelope, every movement, every second, clear, undeniable. Melissa covered her mouth. Daniel looked away, Ryan froze. And Ethan didn't move at all, because there was nowhere left to go. When the video ended, the silence returned. But this time it wasn't empty, it was full of everything they had tried to hide. "I didn't do anything with it," Ethan said suddenly. "I just stopped," I said, one word, calm, final. He stopped, because now he understood. Excuses didn't matter, not anymore. I turned my gaze back to Melissa. "You planned this," I said. She shook her head immediately. "No, You coordinated it," I continued. "You guided it. You decided when to move and how far to go." Her eyes filled with tears, but they didn't move me. Not this time, because I had seen too much. "I wasn't trying to hurt you," she said weakly. I held her gaze. "You were trying to control me," I replied. And there it was, the truth. Simple, clear, unavoidable. I leaned back slightly, my hands still calm, my voice still steady. "I didn't lose my memory," I said again. "I lost my trust." No one spoke, because there was nothing left to say. And in that moment, the performance ended. The truth stood, and everything they had built collapsed. Silence has a way of revealing more than words ever could. After the video ended, no one moved, not immediately. It was as if the room itself had frozen every person caught between denial and reality, between instinct and consequence. I didn't rush it. I didn't fill the silence. Because this moment belonged to the truth, and the truth doesn't need help speaking. Melissa was the first to break. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she said, her voice trembling as tears began to fall. "Mom, please." "You have to understand no," I said calmly. Not loud, not harsh, but firm enough to stop her. "You need to understand." The shift in the room was immediate, because for the first time, I wasn't responding, I was leading. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, pacing slightly. "This isn't what it looks like," he said quickly. "We were just trying to help you. You were confused. You weren't thinking clearly. I was thinking very clearly." I interrupted. He stopped, turned to look at me, and in his eyes I saw it. Not concern, not confusion, fear, because now he didn't know where this was going. "You weren't helping me," I continued. "You were preparing to take control of my life." "That's not fair," Ryan said, suddenly stepping forward. "We were worried about you. You fell, you hit your head. This was about making sure you were protected." Protected, that word again. I looked at her, really looked, protected from what I asked. She hesitated, just long enough, and that was all I needed. "From making your own decisions," I added. "From managing your own life, from existing on your own terms." No answer, because there wasn't one that could justify what they had done. Ethan shifted uncomfortably, finally stepping forward. "Look, I shouldn't have gone into your office," he admitted. "That was wrong. But I didn't take anything real. I didn't use anything. That's not the point," I said. He frowned. "Then what is the point?" I replied steadily, "is that you thought you could." That stopped him. Because that's where the truth lives. Not in what people manage to take, but in what they believe they have the right to take. Melissa wiped her tears quickly, trying to regain control of herself. "You're making this sound worse than it is," she said, her voice tightening. "We weren't stealing from you. We were trying to organize things before something happened. Something like what I asked." She hesitated again, then said quietly, "Before you couldn't manage on your own anymore." There it was, finally said out loud. Not hidden, not softened, just truth. I leaned forward slightly, and who decided that I asked? She didn't answer, because she couldn't. Because the answer was simple. She had. They all had. Without asking me. Without including me. Without respecting me. Daniel stepped in again, his tone shifting from defensive to frustrated. "Mom, you're blowing this out of proportion," he said. "We're your family. We have a right to be involved." I held his gaze. "No," I said quietly. "You have a responsibility to respect me." The words landed harder than anything else I had said, because they weren't emotional, they were factual, and facts are harder to argue with. Ryan crossed her arms, her patience thinning. "So what now?" she asked. "You just cut us off, over a misunderstanding." I almost smiled. "A misunderstanding? That's what you think this is?" I asked. She didn't answer, because now even she could feel it. This wasn't something small. This wasn't something temporary. This was a line, and it had been crossed. I sat back slowly, letting my posture remain calm, grounded. "I've already taken the necessary steps," I said. Daniel's expression tightened. "What steps?" I glanced briefly at Howard. That was enough. He stepped forward, opening the folder again. "Effective immediately," he said calmly, "all access to Mrs. Carter's financial accounts, property records, and legal documents has been restricted." Daniel's face hardened. "What does that mean?" "It means," Howard continued, "that no one here has the authority to make decisions on her behalf. Not now. Not in the future, unless explicitly granted." Melissa's voice shook. "You can't do that." "I already have," I replied. She stared at me, as if she didn't recognize me anymore. And in a way, she didn't, because I wasn't the version of myself they had been expecting. I wasn't confused. I wasn't vulnerable. I wasn't easy. Ethan stepped back, running a hand over his face. "Look," he muttered, "this is getting out of hand." "No," I said calmly. "This is exactly where it needed to go." He looked at me. Really looked. And for the first time, he saw me clearly. Not as an opportunity, not as a situation, but as a person. And that realization made him uncomfortable. Good. It should have. Melissa's tears slowed, replaced by something else. Not guilt, not regret, frustration. "You're punishing us," she said. I shook my head gently. "No," I replied. "I'm protecting myself." Daniel exhaled sharply. "So that's it. After everything we've done for you," I held his gaze. "Everything you've done for me, or everything you've been preparing to do to me, that ended it." Because now there was nothing left to defend. No argument strong enough, no explanation clean enough, no excuse believable enough. The truth had stripped everything else away, and what remained was who they were. Not who they claimed to be, not who they pretended to be, but who they chose to be when they thought I wasn't watching. I stood slowly, not rushed, not dramatic, just steady. "I'm not cutting off my family," I said quietly. "You made that choice yourselves." No one stopped me as I walked toward the door. No one spoke, because they knew. They all knew. This wasn't a moment they could fix. This wasn't something they could talk their way out of. This was consequence, and it was final. As I reached the doorway, I paused, not to turn back, not to reconsider, but to say one last thing. "You didn't lose me because I forgot you," I said softly. I looked at them, each of them, one by one. "You lost me because you forgot who I was," and with that, I walked out of the room, leaving behind everything they had tried to take and everything they had just lost. The house felt different after that day. Not quieter, not emptier, just honest. For the first time in weeks, maybe longer, I wasn't pretending anymore. I didn't have to measure my words, soften my gaze, or calculate every pause. I could walk from room to room without wondering who had been there before me, without listening for footsteps that didn't belong. But honesty comes with its own kind of weight. Because once the truth is out, you don't just lose illusions, you grieve them. I didn't just lose trust in my children. I lost the version of them I had held onto for years. The ones I remembered from birthday parties, school mornings, scraped knees, and bedtime stories. The ones who used to run into my arms without hesitation. The ones who believed I could fix anything. That version of them was gone, and accepting that wasn't easy. The first few days after the confrontation were quiet. No unexpected visits. No phone calls filled with careful concern. No subtle questions wrapped in polite conversation, just silence. And for a while, I let it be. Because silence, unlike manipulation, doesn't ask anything from you. It gives you space. And I needed that. I spent those days doing small things. Walking through the house, opening drawers without tension, sitting by the window in the afternoons, watching the light shift across the yard the way Arthur and I used to. I found myself talking to him sometimes, not out loud, not in a way anyone would hear, but quietly in my thoughts. I handled it, I would say. Or sometimes, just "I wish you were here," because no matter how strong you are, there are moments when you want someone beside you who understands without explanation. And Arthur would have understood, more than anyone. A few days later, I met with Howard again. This time there was no urgency, no hidden meaning, just clarity. We reviewed everything carefully. My will, my assets, my medical directives. Everything that could be used, misunderstood, or manipulated. "I want everything to reflect exactly what I mean," I told him. "It will," he assured me. We made changes. Not out of anger, not out of revenge, but out of truth. Because what had happened wasn't something I could ignore, and pretending it hadn't happened would only invite it to happen again. Access was restricted permanently. Control was defined clearly. No ambiguity, no gray areas, and most importantly, no assumptions. After that, I visited Eleanor. She was in her garden as usual, her hands in the soil, her movements calm and steady. "Well," she said as I approached, "you look different." "I feel different," I replied. She smiled slightly. "Good," she said. "That means you've moved past fear." I nodded. "I think I have." We sat on her porch for a while, talking about everything and nothing. Not about the betrayal, not about the plan, just life. And it reminded me of something I had almost forgotten. There is life outside of family. There is connection outside of obligation. There is trust beyond blood. And sometimes that matters more. But the most important part of my healing didn't come from paperwork or conversations. It came from Lily. She continued to visit, not every day, not in a way that felt forced, just naturally. One afternoon, she sat beside me on the porch, her legs tucked under her, a book resting loosely in her hands. "They're upset," she said quietly. I didn't ask who. I already knew. "I imagine they are," I replied. She looked at me. "Are you okay?" I considered that for a moment, then nodded. "Yes," I said. "I think I am." She studied my face as if trying to understand something deeper than the words. "You don't seem angry," she said. I was, I admitted. At first. And now I looked out at the yard, the sunlight stretching across the grass in long, quiet lines. Now I'm just clear, I said. She tilted her head slightly. What does that mean? It means I see things as they are, I replied. Not as I wish they were. She was quiet for a moment, then nodded. I think that's brave. I smiled faintly. It's necessary. She leaned back slightly, her gaze drifting toward the trees. I don't understand them, she said softly. You don't have to, I replied. But they're your children, she added. I turned to look at her. Yes, I said, they are. And you still love them. That question stayed in the air a little longer than the others, because it mattered, because it wasn't simple. I do, I said finally, but love doesn't mean I accept everything they do. She nodded slowly. I think that makes sense. We sat there in silence after that, not uncomfortable, not heavy, just quiet. And in that moment, I realized something important. Healing doesn't come from fixing what was broken. Sometimes it comes from building something new, something honest, something real. That evening after Lily left, I walked through the house again, but this time I didn't feel the need to check anything, didn't feel the need to watch, didn't feel the need to protect, because everything that needed to be protected already was. I paused in the doorway of my study, looking at the desk, the drawers, the place where all of this had unfolded. And for the first time since it began, I felt at peace. Not because everything was perfect, but because everything was true. And truth is the strongest foundation there is. In the weeks that followed, life didn't return to what it had been, and I didn't expect it to, because once something is revealed that clearly, you don't go back. You move forward with new understanding, new boundaries, and a very different sense of what matters. The house remained quiet, not lonely, just settled. There were no more surprise visits, no more soft conversations that circled around my finances, no more careful glances toward my study. Instead, there was space. And in that space, I began to rebuild something I hadn't realized I had lost. Not my independence, not my strength, but my clarity. Because for a long time, even before the fall, even before the deception, I had been holding onto an idea of my family that no longer existed. And letting go of that idea was harder than anything else. But it was also necessary. A few days after everything was finalized with Howard, I made one more decision. Not impulsively, not emotionally, but intentionally. I invited Daniel and Melissa to meet me, separately, not together, because whatever remained between us needed to be addressed honestly, without influence, without pressure, without performance. Daniel came first. He stood in the doorway for a moment before stepping inside as if he wasn't sure whether he was welcome. "Mom," he said quietly. "Come in," I replied. We sat across from each other in the living room. The same room, but a very different conversation. "I know you're angry," he began. "I'm not angry," I said. He frowned slightly. "Then what?" "I'm aware," I replied. That seemed to confuse him. "I don't understand," he said. "I know you don't," I answered gently, "because you thought what you were doing made sense." He looked down. "I was trying to help," he said. I let that sit for a moment, then asked help who he didn't answer, because now that question wasn't easy. "I saw you," I continued, "not just what you did, but how you thought, how you justified it, how quickly you moved from concern to control." His shoulders tightened slightly. "I didn't mean to hurt you," he said. "I believe that," I replied. He looked up surprised. "You do?" "Yes," I said, "but intent doesn't erase impact." That landed because it was true, and truth has a way of settling where nothing else can. "I don't know how to fix this," he admitted. I nodded slowly. "You don't fix it," I said. "You live differently." He sat with that, quiet, processing, and for the first time since everything happened, I saw something genuine in his expression. Not defensiveness, not justification, but discomfort. The kind that comes from realizing something about yourself you can't ignore. "That's going to take time," he said. "I know," I replied, and I meant it, because change doesn't happen in a moment. It happens in choices, repeated, consistent, real. Melissa came the next day. Her approach was different, more emotional, more direct. I've been thinking about everything she said as soon as she sat down, and I know how it looks. I know what you think. I watched her quietly. What do you think I asked? That I was trying to take advantage of you, she said quickly. I didn't respond right away. Because this mattered. This moment, it mattered. You weren't just trying, I said finally. You were doing it. Her face fell. That's not fair, she said. It's accurate, I replied. She looked away, her hands tightening in her lap. I was scared, she said softly. Of what I asked, of losing control, she admitted. There it was. Not about me, about control. And hearing it out loud made everything clearer. You weren't losing control, I said. You never had it. She flinched slightly, but she didn't argue, because she knew. Deep down, she knew. I thought I was protecting what Dad built, she added. I leaned back slightly. No, I said. You were trying to claim it. The difference mattered, and she felt it. I don't know how to make this right, she said quietly. I looked at her for a long moment, then answered honestly. You don't, I said. You make it different. She nodded slowly, tears in her eyes, but this time they didn't feel like manipulation. They felt like recognition. And that was a start. Not forgiveness. Not yet, but something. After those conversations, I didn't rush anything. I didn't restore access. I didn't change boundaries, because trust isn't rebuilt with words. It's rebuilt with time, with consistency, with proof, and I was willing to give that time, but only if it was earned. As for Ethan, I didn't invite him. Not yet. Some lines take longer to address, and some people need to sit with their choices before they understand them. And that's all right. Because not every relationship needs to return to what it was. Some need to become something else, or end entirely. And both can be healthy. But the most important decision I made, Retim, was about what I would leave behind. Not just financially, but emotionally. Because in the end, that's what matters most. I sat down with Howard one final time, and we finalized everything. Clear, intentional, unambiguous. My assets would go where they were respected, not expected. My home would remain protected, not divided. And Lily would receive something more valuable than money. She would receive trust because she had earned it, not through obligation, not through blood, but through character. And that is what lasts. That evening, I sat on the porch alone, watching the sun set slowly across the yard, the same light, but a different life. And as I sat there, I realized something I hadn't fully understood before. Getting older doesn't make you powerless. It reveals what power really is. Not control, not ownership, not access, but choice. The choice to see clearly, the choice to act wisely, the choice to protect what matters, and the choice to walk away from what doesn't. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the quiet settle around me, then opened them again. Not confused, not uncertain, but completely present. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. Growing older is something no one can avoid, but becoming vulnerable is not something you have to accept. What this experience taught me is that danger doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it comes wrapped in familiar voices, gentle concern, and words that sound like love. That's what makes it so difficult to recognize and even harder to confront. But here's the truth I want you to hold on to. You are allowed to protect yourself. You are allowed to ask questions. You are allowed to say no, even to your own family, because love without respect is not love, and care without honesty is not care. If something feels off, trust that feeling. You don't need proof to start paying attention. You don't need permission to protect what you've built. And most importantly, you are never too old to take control of your life again. Even in the face of betrayal, even in moments of doubt, even when the people you trusted the most let you down, there is always a way forward. Sometimes it just starts with seeing clearly. If this story meant something to you, I'd really love to hear your thoughts. What would you have done in my place? And have you ever experienced something similar? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. I read more of them than you might think. And if stories like this speak to you, don't forget to subscribe. There are more stories waiting, real, emotional, and honest, just like this one. You're not alone, and your story matters too.